Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our members and guests for our fireside chat with Syed Saddiq and Shahril Sufian Hamdan for tonight's evening talk, which is the Malaysian Youth Dilemma. When I arrived in Malaysia over 20 years ago now, the Malay dilemma was required reading, and I guess it still is for anyone new to Malaysia who wants to get a deeper understanding of some of the issues that Malaysia is tackling. The title of this talk is both reflective of our past, our present, and perhaps our future as well. So are we at a point in our Malaysian journey when it's time for a radical political rethink? We're living in fascinating political times, so we are excited and honored to have two such young, articulate, and engaging speakers with us this evening. Before I introduce everybody, can I just say thank you to Sharifa Bakar Ali for enabling this event to go ahead. Thank you, Sharifa. And I apologize for having to cut down on the bio. These guys have done such a lot in their relatively short lives, but I had to cut it down. So YB Syed Saddiq Syed Abdul Rahman is the former Malaysia's Minister of Youth and Sports and a Member of Parliament for Muar, Johor. He is a law graduate from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and he received an academic fellow at Temple University, Dialogue Institute on the Art of Dialoguing and Religious Pluralism. He was also appointed the Special Advisor in the Prime Minister's Office under YB Nancy Sukri. He's also a researcher, international debate coach, columnist, member of the National Consultative Council on Political Financing, editor-in-chief, consultant on public policy, and international renowned speaker. He's a recipient of the Perdana Belia Negara Award, the Malaysian Youth Leaders Award, and the Youth Merdeka Award, and also the Tokoh Siswa Award. He's recently been shortlisted for the One Young World Politician of the Year Award. Currently, he's doing his Master's in Public Policy at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. He's served as Member of Parliament for Muar since May 2018, and he has recently founded the Malaysian United Democratic Alliance, and he did that in September 2020. Our second speaker this evening is Shahril Sufian Hamdan. His first position in mainstream politics was as UMNO Youth Executive Member, where he chaired the Young Professionals Bureau, which empowered young professionals in Malaysia. He read economics and politics at the University of Manchester before attending the LSE as a Chevening Scholar, where he obtained a Master's in Sociology and graduated top of his class. He has had a wide range of experience in both the public and private sectors. He served as a policy officer to YB Khairi Jamaluddin before working for Teach for Malaysia, an independent non-profit organization. He then worked in the private sector as a management consultant with McKinsey & Co., leading a global strategic management consultancy firm, which is it's a leading global consultancy firm. He's also CEO of an upstream oil and gas services company. Currently, he is a partner to venture capital company, and Shahril is currently the UMNO Information Chief and Deputy Chief of UMNO Youth. So who are our moderators this evening? We have Mark Disney, who studied English at St Edmunds Hall in Oxford and has worked in publishing and journalism as well as teaching. He is currently the deputy head of the sixth form at College Tunku Jaffa, where he is especially focused on wider academic enrichment and inspiring intellectual curiosity. We hope he's got his students watching now. He's moderated many of the events for the Oxford Society and other institutions such as LSE, and he's a past president of the Oxford Society and sits on our current EXCO. Shien is in her second year at Newnham College, Cambridge, where she's studying history and politics. And if you just look in her background, there's her lovely room at Newnham there. She's an alumna of College Tunku Jaffa and Sri Kedu International School, and is the 2018 winner of The Economist 2018 A Minute to Change the World Open Future Video Contest. She is currently the president of KUMAS, which is the Cambridge University Malaysian Society. So welcome to Mark and Sue, and especially welcome to Syed Saddiq and Shahril Sufian Hamdan. Thank you all for coming, everybody. I'm going to hand you over to your moderators.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emma, for the introductions, and welcome to Syed and Shahril. Thank you very much for giving up your time this evening. There are so many different areas that we could investigate. There are economic issues, I think, to do with unemployment, underemployment, wage stagnation. There are social issues, housing, nation building, and so forth, educational, political. We could go on. I think there are also, I'd like you perhaps at some point to address what you might term kind of psychological or even spiritual, philosophical, existential questions about Malaysia and its future. So there are many, many different areas that we could cover. We have a few questions. I'm going to ask Sue to begin in a minute. And whilst we are posing these questions, what we would really like is to hear you two guys kind of talking to each other. Obviously, you're from different ideological perspectives. Perhaps you're from different ideological perspectives. That perhaps remains to be seen. But I think we would be very, very interested in getting an insight into what young Malaysians, young political Malaysians, young Malays, think of the current situation we're in and how we're going to get out of it. So many of these topics could fill a conference on their own. If anybody out there listening on YouTube, students, members of the society and so on, please post your comments. They don't have to be questions. They can be observations, comments. Post them and Sharifa and Emma will be feeding them through. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Shien, who's going to kick us off with the first question. Sue, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you guys for being here once again. So let's start off with something that I think it will just help us set the groundwork of today's interview and sort of panel session. So what is the both of yours vision of Malaysia? In an ideal world, with the goodwill and the good sense of all, what kind of Malaysia do you want to see in 20 years' time? So maybe we can start with UYB. And then
sure.
We can vision.
Thank you very much, Shien. How long do I have to summarize this wonderful world, which is Malaysia, just so that I'm on time?
2 or 3 minutes. Keep it brief, and then we'll bring Shahril in.
Sure. In summary, I believe the way in which we move forward is to embrace the great diversity which is Malaysia. We should never treat the diverse energy of Malaysia as a liability. Instead, should harness it and should always treat it as an asset. Multiracialism is the way forward. Institutional reforms in which we weaken the hands of the executive and the government and return power back to the people, which essentially can only come through democratic reforms and the decentralization of power in the hands of a select few. What this means in policies, it means that we have an independent parliamentary institution which no longer can be chained by the executive or by the Prime Minister. It means by having an independent Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, which again no longer reports to the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office, but is placed directly under the Parliament or under an independent unit. It means that the Prime Minister will not be given a slush budget, which amounts to the billions, which the Prime Minister can spend at his or her discretion. So in a way, institutional reforms, embracing multiracialism, and at the same time, bringing up more young leaders and refreshing and revitalizing political parties. It means that we no longer will be beholden to the same group of leadership which have ruled for the past 2 or 3 or even 4 decades. And by bringing more and more young leaders up in all parties, not just those in government or in opposition. I believe moving forward, I think with those formula in place, we will get a prosperous, multiracial Malaysia in which we break away from the middle income trap, in which we ensure that we stop not just the capital flight, but also intellectual capital flight, where a lot more young Malaysians leave but will come back. Great individuals like Jalil Rashid, the former chief of PNB, which unfortunately was let go by this government due to his outspokenness on issues of abuse of power. So I believe moving forward, the Malaysia which will come is one which embraces diversity, multiracialism, which is moderate and centrist in nature, and one which decentralizes power from the hands of the elite. I have great hopes for Malaysia, especially when we give more opportunities to young leaders in all political parties to compete and compete healthily and remove the politics of vengeance and vendetta, which eats up the energy of Malaysia.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Shahril, would you like to share with us your vision of Malaysia? Maybe how it might be the same as YB's vision, or how it could differ?
Thanks, Shien. Mark, I think you started it off by catching yourself, wondering if Saddiq and my views might differ all that much after all. On this first question, I must say there's not much to disagree. I'm going to contribute to this discussion, particularly on this question, perhaps by bringing it from a different angle. And I think Saddiq mentioned quite rightly very specific ideals or wants that he has, none of which I have any complaints about. More generally, though, to take this conversation slightly from a different angle, I see a Malaysia, or I hope for a Malaysia in 20 years where when my daughter, who's only 2.5 now, grows up to be in her mid-20s, I want it to be a Malaysia where she can really fulfill her potential, where she doesn't have to grapple with absolutisms, which I think is a problem that Malaysia has had to face and is especially facing right now. You are either this or that. You're either you're either good or bad. You're either Malay or non-Malay. You're either completely Muslim and therefore must obey or must adhere to certain conceptions of what a Muslim identity is, or you are completely the other end of the spectrum. I want a Malaysia that celebrates not just multiracialism, but the complications and the nuances of one's identity. I think other countries have embraced that perhaps faster than we have. We seem to be stuck in binaries, in all manner of conversation we have, whether it's abrasive conversations around party politics, or even when we talk about ourselves and our identities as Malaysians. And I'd like to see in 20 years those absolutisms melt away to better reflect what lived reality actually is, which is that we are hybridized in every sense of the word.
Okay, thank you for that. Stu, do you want to carry on? I think the next question is a logical continuation of the last.
Yeah, but before that, I just have one question. So the both of you talk. Okay, so also, Shahril, would you mind speaking a bit louder because you're a bit soft on the mic? Thank you. Okay, so
still trouble. Then I'll take my earphones, but I'll speak louder from now on.
Okay, thank you. Great, that'd be great. Okay, so the thing that something in common that the both of you talk about is talking about wanting a more accepting Malaysia, trying to bring young people back from Malaysia. And the thing is, there are a lot of young Malaysians overseas who are both at home and overseas who are very much interested in the politics that are happening at home. And I remember myself being very immersed in what was happening earlier on this year with the whole political drama. But the thing is, I feel like watching all that unfold from so far away, you can't help but feel just sort of hopeless, and just sort of like that the things that you do so far away from home won't really help, and you don't feel welcome back home, even if you were to go back. So I think what I want to ask right now is just you both talk so much about being more accepting, celebrating diversity, celebrating our hybridization of our country. But how do you plan to incentivize young Malaysians to stay in the country, or if they are studying overseas, return home, when we can see very clearly from where we are that the situation at home is very polarized, and it doesn't feel like there's much we can do to change? Because we've watched, like when Pakatan came into power, we watched them try to institute change, but there are still so many things that weren't able to come into being. And we still feel like a lot of the issues that we care about, like mental health issues about LGBTQ rights, they're not being discussed. So if you really want to create a Malaysia which celebrates diversity, celebrates our multiracialism, celebrates everyone in our country, then how would both of you go about building an environment that is conducive to that and that will incentivize Malaysian youths to stay on? And so we prevent, like, as you say, YB, an intellectual drain on our resources.
Yeah. Who should start?
Either
yes,
one of
please.
you.
Syed Saddiq, if you could start.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, just to point out that your voices matter. If it didn't, there wouldn't be a change in government for the very first time in Malaysian history, which happened in last election. And that while change was difficult, in which we were in government, I think we were able to get the voices of young people in every single decision-making process. I think a lot more change would take place. To show a few key examples, I think that in less than 2 years, we got 3 constitutional amendments through, which is about reducing voting age from 21 to 18 years old, and also a historic bipartisan resolution together, which inevitably will increase the number of young voters or new voters by 7.8 million people. I think when you put together institutional reforms through the decentralization of power, you put together more young, fresh faces in politics, which have the genuine drive for change, and at the same time, you also embrace more bipartisanship and get rid of the politics of vengeance, vendetta, and divisions. I think these 3 things will be able to move Malaysia to a great extent. So, I mean, not only in that short time span, we got 3 constitutional amendments through, we were also able to appoint more young people in important decision-making process. Remember, negotiating with the Prime Minister, the economic advisor to the Prime Minister, with the head of Khazanah Nasional, the biggest GLC in Malaysia, to appoint more young members in corporate boards. So you cannot just talk about getting young people in decision-making process, but in politics only. It's also mean in running the economic management of the country. That's where we got 3 young people on the top economic council of Malaysia, the NEAC. We had 3 young people. Never has it been done before. We had people like Jalil Rashid being heading one of the largest GLCs in Malaysia. And we had a lot more young people on respective corporate boards, whether they are GLCs or GLICs or even agencies. So obviously it will take time for that change to be felt. It's just that my worry is that that change which has been instituted will regress after this. Now we no longer see young people, not just in the highest echelons in politics, but in corporate boards, those who were appointed when they were young, removed already. And at the same time, these stories will definitely dishearten a lot of young Malaysians out there. So I think it can be done. I hope that young Malaysians are not disheartened. I mean, their voice matters. If it didn't, we would not be where we are at today. And that while there was a tragic change in government, which happened in February and March, however, I think that should just increase our resolve to keep on pushing forward. Because if we don't, then in the end, what we despise about Malaysian politics will forever remain in the hands of those who we despise, because apathy will only support those who we despise and who are in power at the moment.
Okay, thank you, YB.
Thanks. And Shahril, who, I mean, I'm not quite sure who Saddiq means by those he despises. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that.
Sure. I mean, I've been very clear in going against what happened in the months of February and March, which is a betrayal of the people's mandate, despite the fact that it came from my own party, one of the parties which I helped co-founded, Bersatu. Even if it meant losing my ministerial portfolio, me being kicked out from my very first party, but I think taking the principled ground is something which matters. They can threaten me, they can offer me whatever they want, but I think when it is a matter of principle, we must stick to it. And moving forward, I think the Malaysian voters must send a clear message that we do not accept this kind of politics. My fear is, if we normalize it, then trust me, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, you'll have a lot more MPs doing the same thing. Who cares? I mean, the voters voted me in this way. Halfway through the term, I'll change for power and positions. And in the next election, I will be rewarded, not punished by the very same voters. So we need to change that culture once and for all. Not to say, again, that those in opposition today are free of guilt. We have our own responsibilities, which we failed to fulfill. We must own up to it. I think opposition must apologize for the slow reforms. I mean, the fact that it took me 1 year to convince my own cabinet on Undi 18, which is reducing voting age from 21 to 18, something very simple included in the manifesto, because of the fear that we won't get support from opposition because we need bipartisanship. When you don't try, obviously you will not get opposition support, but you must show goodwill, you must talk to them. So I think we could have been much faster, for example, on making Parliament an independent institution by ensuring that MACC is independent, by ensuring that all parliamentarians get equal allocation, doesn't matter whether you're in government or opposition. So when we are slow, thinking that we have 5 years, and suddenly realizing that in 2 years' time there was a change in government, I think that's truly tragic. So moving forward, we must acknowledge our mistakes and move forward as a united opposition to hold government accountable and prepare for next election.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that, when you look at Bersatu, Amanah and so on, I mean, we all know the expression, new wine in old bottles. This was old wine in new bottles, wasn't it? It was the same old faces, Bersatu. I mean, this is an UMNO splinter group. I mean, Shahril, I'd love to get your view on this. I mean, whenever you read about you in the press, it's always Shahril Hamdan, poster boy for progressive UMNO. Which always struck me as a contradiction in terms. Do you want to try to convince me that UMNO progressive is a real thing?
Sure, I'll do that, but I'll do that in a second. I was taken by what Saddiq said towards the latter half of his remarks just now, in which I was happy to hear he says the current opposition bears some responsibility for the problems that have besieged us in recent times. But I wish it would be more specific in the sense that for all that's happened now, and how Saddiq and his colleagues aren't that pleased about what happened in February and March, I can say on the record that I wasn't pleased either. It was not something that I felt was necessary to have been engineered. But the question that one has to answer is, what about the political system that allowed it to happen? And Saddiq mentioned some truths about people jumping and people switching allegiances and alliances very, very quickly when it served their narrow interests. I'd like to think if I was ever put in such a position, I would not. But the point is, both folks in the current government and opposition bear a certain amount of responsibility for what's happened. The government wouldn't have collapsed if not for the infighting that existed in Pakatan Harapan. I think that's not merely a partisan point to shoot across, but I think it's a fair point of history. And if folks forget, I'd like to remind them that when the government collapsed and when Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad resigned, the then main opposition, Barisan Nasional and PAS, the first request that they all had was for there to have been elections. In the absence of elections, only then was such this new hodgepodge government created. So I think that's something that's important for people to sort of recognize, that it isn't when Saddiq says people that he despises, when Saddiq says that we, young people ought to be exercised and excited about making sure that their voices are heard and mandate respected, completely agree. Where I slightly disagree is the way he frames it, as if it was only one side who bears responsibility for this. Whether or not this is a generational thing, whether or not if folks from both sides of the aisle were younger, had more commitment to the ideals of democracy, things would have been different. That's for us to discuss and to speculate. But I completely agree that if we don't change the faces in politics, not necessarily wholesale, but when we don't refresh people who represent both sides of the aisle, and now the aisles keep changing anyway, then we're bound to revisit the same kind of episodes, which upon reflection doesn't bode well for democracy, doesn't bode well for our image and our reputation. So I have no quarrel with that. My only quarrel is the reading of history of how we got here. But to answer your question, Mark, about this poster boy thing, it's never something that I explicitly wear. It's just something almost by default I get slapped with. And
it's a good thing, surely.
Sure.
You're not being it's a good thing.
No complaints about that. I'm happy to be branded with that rather than something else that perhaps less complimentary. But of course, it invites skepticism from yourself. It invites skepticism and cynicism from people elsewhere whose response to this idea of a progressive UMNO or a progressive group of people in UMNO is to say that we are false progressive. So it does invite chagrin as much as amusement. My response to it, if asked, is that I think I have to admit the fact that I'm slapped with this by default already suggests that the perception and the image of UMNO isn't progressive. That's why you need to have a otherwise it wouldn't even come up in conversation. So I admit that there is an issue in which the image of the party and perhaps a reflection of the mainstream reality of the party is that it's still very conservative in many senses of the word. In the sense that its politics and what it fights for and how it frames its struggle is still old school. It's also conservative in the sense that it's very resistant to change. So in the most basic definition of the word, it's very resistant to change, even with it. To do things that are a bit out of the box, to fight or to say things that are different from what is normal or what is traditional in the party is still frowned upon. So for that reason, I think that's why people like me who, however you locate me in ideological spectrums, clearly feels differently about how UMNO should operate. That's why I think I get that label. But I'm happy to speak more substantively about what I actually believe in politically, in terms of not just within UMNO but within Malaysian politics in general. And very quickly, just a couple of 10-20 seconds. Apart from my initial answer to the first question, I feel that Malay politics and the Malay struggle of which UMNO is inextricably a part has to be framed in a way that's contemporary and straddles both the realities of the country but also the aspirations of 21st century Malaysia. And that means, quite briefly, that we don't have to frame it in a zero-sum game. I think that's the first step. Secondly, we have to also think of ways in which the Malay struggle can be accepted by all as a national project. And that means that when we fight for certain policies, it doesn't always have to be racial in its articulation. When we fight for certain outcomes that we want for the Malay position, for example, it doesn't have to come at the expense of others. And I'm happy to elaborate more later if we go deeper into this.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, we've got 2-3 questions have come in already, Shahril, on that. One from Lukman, who says that it's a bit rich to say that Malaysia should embrace multiculturalism, multiracialism, when you belong to an exclusivist Malay party. That's from Lukman Hakim. Alden, another, I think, a student, also comments on this, the idea of bipartisanship, which Syed brought up. So perhaps if I could just address the first bit to Syed Saddiq. You talk about bipartisanship. You were talking about multiracialism in politics. Is that the only way forward, or do you think we are stuck with these old racial tropes that will never change? Because without that, nothing changes, right? That would be the argument.
Yeah. If there is no leadership change, I'm not just talking about government, I'm also talking about opposition in respective parties. And at the same time, there's no change in mindsets, attitudes, in wanting to work the ground, not just practice the politics of pandering, then I think Malaysia will regress. We have so much potential, but it's largely locked. I mean, just to answer what Shahril pointed out just now, I'm not blinded by the fact that those in opposition also have a fair share of blame to shoulder as well, and I think we should. So to say that I haven't acknowledged that, I think is untrue. I mean, really, if I'm to give a whole chronology of what happened, it will be a whole thesis. But I'm aware that everyone should shoulder the blame, and I just hope that the young ones in respective parties will ensure that the Sheraton move will never ever again repeat in Malaysia's history, and we need to find a way to ensure that Malaysian democratic institution is strong enough to guard us from the horrific mistake which we have gone through. But to specifically answer the question which you raised, I think if there's no leadership change, there's no revitalization of politics in respective parties, then I think we won't change much. You can change governments every single week, but it's still the same mindset. I think leaders must acknowledge that there is a systematic problem with Malaysian democracy and how we run Malaysia. Only then can we move forward. And I hope through bipartisanship, it can be done. The fact that, again, there's this traditional mindset that opposition and government can never work together. It's not that we're forming government with the opposition. Really, just about meeting up with them, making important policy compromises to move forward. To me, it's problematic. I remember I was condemned by my very own party, by those in my coalition, by my own cabinet ministers, when I decided to meet up or to cross the aisle to meet up with Tok Guru Hadi, to meet up with the president of UMNO, to meet up with MPs of UMNO, in wanting to get their support to reduce the voting age. And to them, it's impossible. You don't have 2/3 majority, therefore you cannot talk to opposition. Opposition will never give you support, which is ridiculous. I mean, we have to acknowledge that political walls can be broken down for greater Malaysian good. Just look at what happened in Johor recently, right? The fact that when an UMNO chief minister could reach a middle ground with opposition state legislative assemblymen, then the budget could be passed unanimously, right? It's just about finding a compromise, sitting down, appointing more opposition on select committees so that there's greater accountability and transparency, restoring allocations. It can be done. So the way in which we move forward, we must break down polarized political walls. It's not about forming government, but it's about acknowledging that while we may be in different parties, that we share a lot more in common than differences, and at the same time to ensure that we truly push in the reforms, democratic reforms, because I think with that, parties will revitalize, the warlords will be gone. I think we truly miss a unique opportunity, which is to institute the Political Funding Act, PFA. I worked really hard on it. I was tasked by the Presidential Council of Pakatan Harapan to lead on this. I met up with MACC chief, I met up with Tan Sri Abu Qasim, met up with leaders of political parties. It was supposed to be passed in Parliament in March 2020, but due to Sheraton, it was pushed back, and now I heard it's pushed back indefinitely. I mean, if we can't even legislate a basic Political Funding Act, which regulates political corruption and funding among parties, I think it's very tough for us to get rid of the old warlordism kind of politics which exists in all parties. I think particularly bad in UMNO, because UMNO has been there for God knows how long. So, I mean, the oldies will never want to leave, because if you are a division chief and you are in government, you'll get contracts, and therefore it becomes really tough for people like Shahril and others to climb up. I think once you get rid of that, you'll automatically see a revitalization of Malaysian politics in all parties, government and opposition.
Thank you. Shahril, you must want to respond to that. I'd also like you to address the point that you just made. You said, you talked about UMNO's raison d'etre as the Malay struggle. This is a cliche we hear all the time, the Malay struggle. Given that the Malays or Bumiputra are nearly 70%, they control virtually everything in the country, civil service and so on, GLCs. What is it specifically about the Malay struggle that you are still fighting for? Apa lagi Melayu mau?
Nice one, nice. So, in my mind, first, can I respond to one of the questions that I think went through the ticker, and I think that begins to answer your question, Mark. Mm-hmm. Look, if I'm speaking to an audience who doesn't believe that there is a place for any race-based party, whatever I say will never be able to convince them. So let's just put that out there. So if your red line is that anyone in a race-based party must be by definition unhelpful to the process of democratization and progress, then I've lost you. And the best I can do is try and persuade you to relook at that. And maybe I'm going to do that for a bit, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a question of judgment, of what you think is achievable in one's lifetime. I really don't want to get too philosophical so early on, but I genuinely feel that there's something there. That's how I answer it to myself. Now, you can laugh at me, you can think, I'm selling out or whatever. Very nice things that I've read over the years. But I genuinely feel if anyone can just open up their minds to the possibility that some of us in UMNO enter this party for a larger Malaysian struggle, but understand that for those goals to be achieved, one has to change a lot within the Malay community. Now, you can change the Malay community in any which way, Mark. You could do it in PKR. You could do it like Saddiq is doing. You could do it in DAP. You could. But allow for the possibility that some of us, for whatever reason, feel that there is a certain affinity with UMNO, and there is an argument that if you can change UMNO, and God knows it's a tall order, but if you can change UMNO, you really have it's the biggest bang for your buck in terms of changing Malay mindsets, in terms of getting out of the siege mentality, Mark, that I think you're implying, about why Malays feel that they still need to be assisted, etc., etc. I don't want to go into great detail about what exactly that struggle is, but I think everyone here knows what the Malay consciousness is. Yeah, it's diverse. I'm not saying it's unitary, but I think without me being able to articulate it super greatly, everyone here understands the Malay consciousness has something to do with it feeling that its indigeneity to this land affords it certain benefits and positions or certain taken for granted privileges. Now, people like me within UMNO who have a Malaysian outlook, my duty, my job in this lifetime, and a question that I will not be able to answer, I hope you don't ask me, Mark, is that, if I had it all over to do it again, if we were in John Rawls's world and we could create Malaysia the way we want to create it, I can't answer that question, but I'm alive in this year. And I'm alive when UMNO is still a big part of the Malay consciousness. So I chose to go in it, and I continue to choose to stay in it for as long as I feel that I can contribute to changing the way it's run, to changing the way it dominates the Malay mind, not to reduce its dominance, of course I want it to continue to dominate, but to do it in a way that can contribute towards a progress in the Malay mindset of what it is to be Melayu in 21st century Malaysia, knowing that within my lifetime, I cannot see a world in which the vast majority of Malays think differently about racial identity. I cannot see a world in which racial identity gets relegated to such a low level in which a Malay-based party does not have a hold on the Malay political identity. So that's my answer.
Okay.
And that's genuinely how I feel about myself staying in the party. And I cannot stress enough that I will only stay and I'll continue to fight for as long as I feel that I have something to contribute towards that larger goal, which is not a partisan goal. It's a Malaysian goal via a change in the Malay mindset.
Thank you. Over to you, Sue. I think we've got about 15, 20 minutes left.
Oh.
So if you want to pick up on one of the other questions.
Yeah, okay. I think there's a lot to digest from what you just said, Shahril. So I'm just taking a moment to do that, to process that. Okay, so I think trying to separate this sort of idea of like the Malay issue and then a Malaysian issue, and you seem to be trying to your focus is the Malaysian question, right? So we have a question here from Lucas Appleton. Do you believe that it's necessary to move the country away from a religious dogma in order to uphold fundamental liberties and develop Malaysia to reach your aspirations for the country? I think from what you just said just now, I think what you have said is that it's not possible for us to sort of like envision a Malaysia in this lifetime where race-based politics is not a central part of our political landscape, but like
I hope I'm wrong, Shien.
Uh,
If that world comes to light, then we'll have a different conversation.
yeah, I guess so. But I mean, as like a non-Malay youth, hearing that from someone who is very involved in the politics in Malaysia, it is very disheartening to know that, like, despite all our talks of multiracialism and celebration of diversity, there still is like that like almost disconnect between what is being said and what is actually reality. So I guess Lucas, I guess you've already answered Lucas's question.
Can I just jump very quickly? I'll pass it off to Saddiq if he wants to add.
Yeah, of course.
I think, Shien, you're being too harsh on Malaysia, in the sense that you're implying that for as long as your UMNOs, MCA, MICs, and can I just say your DAP of the world exists, that multiracialism cannot be celebrated or can't be lived. We have been living it for however long our country has been, not just in existence, but even before that, right? It's just that this is one of those elements within our country that we'll have to manage. And I think it's too harsh to say that until we get too harsh and too simplistic, and you might be disappointed. If to suggest that the block to true multiculturalism and diversity celebration is the non-existence of race-based parties, all you have to do is look around the world where race-based parties don't exist, and ask yourself if race-based politics is truly over in those countries.
That's true. Okay. I guess then my next question would just be, in terms of letting that space, accommodating that space for, and using that space to sort of channel change for the country. Then, which of these, like, I think for a lot of Malaysian youths, there are a lot of policies which we consider the way forward. So, for example, supporting LGBTQ causes and mental health issues. So, I think for the both of you, is this something? Are both of these causes things that you would consider like liberal causes that you would support?
Just to share, I mean, again, to cut some slack on Shahril, I was also a part of a race-based party. I was part of Bersatu, and it was the first party which I helped co-found it. But as I've gone on record before, I proposed for the party to be multiracial. Oddly enough, when it was discussed among the opposition coalition, it is people like Lim Kit Siang, Khalid Samad, who rejected it and said that we needed a Malay party to challenge UMNO at its stronghold. And I remember that while I had to leave that compromise, there were a lot of compromises which I extracted as well. One, Bersatu had associate membership. Two, Armada was the first wing to appoint non-Malays in its leadership, Saudara Murali, which is an EXCO top leader. And I also remember going on record stating that in 2 terms, Bersatu must open up by hook or by crook. I remember getting, condemned by my own party leaders as to why I said that, but I said that's my personal stance. I remember even before election, being a part of a Malay party, I openly talked about the need for sex education reforms, and I also remember guys in UMNO condemning me, saying that Saddiq wants to distribute free condoms to all Malaysians. Well, in reality,
by the way, internally.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. But the loudest one obviously were the top leaders. I mean, to be fair to Shahril, again, even my own party leaders questioned me as well. It is as if, this is all about sex and not really about education reforms and the need to deal with high numbers of HIV, AIDS, and baby dumping, which is particularly chronic in specific parts of Malaysia and most chronic among the Malay community due to the lack of education and support. I remember before election, again, just to show, while being a part of a Malay party, I spoke about the need to deal with transgender community better. There was this transgender who sold nasi lemak, a popular Malaysian dish, and then she was widely condemned, discriminated, and people asked to boycott her because she was selling nasi lemak. But the reality is, if we are unable to deal with compassion, that's when you force them into the prostitution trade, which again leads to worse outcomes. I mean, when we just swipe it under the rug, the least which we can do, at least to deal with it with compassion. And again, you've seen the Mufti of Wilayah, who's now the Minister of Religion, dealing with cases like this with compassion by providing support and also mental health support as well. I remember when I was part of government, this was something which we raised quite heavily in cabinet. There was a campaign, a national campaign to deal with it, and greater allocations put in and cross-ministerial support. And I have to thank Dr. Zul, the former Minister of Health, for driving this effort forward. I have to also thank Tunku Iman, the daughter to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the King, for spearheading this effort as well. So, I mean, there are some tough lines to deal with in Malaysia, but when you are in a position of change, maybe you might not be able to go to the greatest extent. Find areas which you're able to push, and at least to deal with issues like this with greater compassion.
Can I just put that, Sue, just to follow up with Shahril, perhaps? Terms like moderate, liberal, secular, these are terms that would have been no issue to your parents or your grandparents' generation. You talk about who the Malays are. The Malays have changed. The Malays have changed massively in the last 50 years, 30 years. They'll continue to change, just like everybody does. So this idea that it's about the difficulty of changing the Malay mindset has been changed. It's been changed since the 80s, really. And I've been here nearly 30 years, and anybody older than me, anyone in their late 50s, 60s, automatically I find it very easy to talk to them. They're much more, I'm talking about Malays, much more liberal, much more open. It's the Malays younger than me who I think are different. It's an unusual country, Malaysia, in that the older generation are more liberal than the younger generation. I don't know anywhere else in the world that's like that. So it's very difficult to know how things are going to change when we're getting, when your previous boss, Najib, and actually when Saddiq's previous boss, Dr. Mahathir, when I interviewed Dr. Mahathir, he was very, very anti-liberal, anti-secular, anti-moderate. And I think it's difficult for a lot of people to kind of grasp, do they have a different understanding of the word liberal or secular? I'd like to put that to Shahril.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, Mark. Let me first tread carefully, or say that I want to tread carefully, because I've heard this anecdotal accounts about how supposedly older Malays were more liberal, for the lack of a better term. But no one's, how do you even measure that, right? But let's say you're right. I think it's definitely interesting, to say the least, how we've moved. I can't say regress because that implies how I feel about it. How we move in that direction. But what I want to say with more, I suppose, more importantly, is, look, what you've seen in the last 10-15 minutes, me and Saddiq speaking, is that at the risk of this virtue signaling, both of us and both our parties recognize that there needs to be some measure of opening up. Now, I think people like Saddiq and I will be quite happy if things were very, very different. So when he was in Bersatu, he ensured that over time Bersatu would, when he was still a member, open up its membership. In UMNO, few people know, but in Sabah especially, there are many Christian leaders who are in UMNO. Now that begins to tell you that political parties at the end of the day are political parties. Meaning when it serves their exigencies of the moment, they'll redefine certain sacred or sacrosanct terms. Like what is a Bumi Putra, what's a Malay? So we call ourselves a Malay party, but there are non-Muslim Bumi Putras in high leadership positions in our party, at least in the local level, division level. Now, will they ever become president of a party? Okay, that's a different question. But the point is, even there's flexibility. In past, often branded as an Islamist party, they have a wing or a Dewan Himpunan, can't think of what the English translation is, where there are non-Malays and non-Muslims that are part of that and attend meetings, as far as I understand. So there are tentative steps which moderates, progressives can capitalize or can work on towards an outcome that perhaps people in this forum will be happier with. And I think you can see that the younger generation, at least the ones who brand themselves as moderates or happy to take on that tag, have those goals. It's just that we live within the boundaries that have been set for us. We push it, we try and break through it, but they are there. And how we choose to navigate those boundaries are both a question of what we can live with ourselves and also a question of political skill. That's as transparent, I think, as Saddiq and I can get. But the other thing I wanted to unpack from what you said, Mark, is this labeling of liberals, secular, moderates, and wouldn't have been a problem in the past is a problem now. I think it's interesting to study how those terms have been weaponized to become supposedly bad things that people in my party throw out. Not just to me, not just towards me when they want to attack me internally, but also just as shorthand for things that we're supposed to avoid. Pluralism, liberalism. I mean, I don't understand either, Mark, how suddenly terms that we used to celebrate and were mentioned in our Rukun Negara, there are old newspaper cuttings of what Tunku Abdul Rahman said. This was meant to be a liberal country. Nobody even thinks what liberalism is meant to be. Those who criticize it don't even try to understand it. And I suppose that's what I try and do within my party to convince people that these are not, these are not just demon words that you ought to be afraid of, or demon concepts, Western imported concepts that you ought to be afraid of, but are actually part of our hybridized history. So as much as I tread carefully, Mark, about this anecdotalism about, things were different in the past, I accept it as quite a real possibility. And if that means I'm bringing country back, or trying to bring Malays back to that more hybridized and complicated sense of self, then so be it. I don't think of it as forward or backward. I think of it of what I think is best for the community that I'm meant to represent, as well as Malaysians as a whole.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe we could bring Syed back in. I've got a couple of questions in the feed, Syed. One is from Faisal Arif. I'm not sure who that is. Many Malaysians have lost confidence in our politicians in general, whether those in power or the opposition. What is your plan to restore the belief of voters for GE15? And then perhaps you could both answer this question from Angad Kalson. Again, I'm not sure who that is, but it says, in your personal opinion, forget about parties, political parties. If you could pick a prime minister, starting from next year, starting from 2021, if you could select anyone in politics now who you think would be the ideal PM, who would it be? That's from Angad.
You go first, man.
Now I'll start first with the first question. I think that sense of hopelessness comes from the fact that there is a lack of direction and vision on how we want to take Malaysia forward, whether it's from the government or also from the opposition. There's a lack of leadership and a huge vacuum which is yet to be filled. I think first things first, opposition needs to behave as if they are in opposition and will be government in waiting, which will come through the next election. If we keep on playing this dangerous game of backdoor politics, I think we will get sucked in. This is not a game which we are good at, and this is a game which will sap confidence and that great sense of direction among opposition parties. So I think really we need to revitalize existing leadership in political parties, in the opposition, hold government to account, come up with a clear vision and direction on how we want to take the country forward, not get caught into, oh, I have the numbers, they have the numbers, I'm going to work with Zahid, I'm going to work with Najib. Again, talking on policies is different than talking about forming government is categorically different. I think really, if we're able to get our act together, unite, portray the vision of Malaysia which we want, admit to the mistakes which we've made, start to revitalize existing leadership, come up with a PM candidate, come up with a common manifesto, and at the same time, with really going on the ground now, explaining what vision of Malaysia which we want, which is one which is inherently multiracial, treats diversity as an asset, prescribe the reforms and the timeline which we will put in, specifically what kind of reforms which we want, and at the same time, really go on the ground, not practice the politics of pandering, but really changing hearts and minds of people. I think we will be able to do the impossible. But if we keep on thinking about the short game, I think we will get caught. I really do not know what's happening now. There is truly a lack of direction. Look at what happened in Perak. I mean, I'm not sure what Shahril's thoughts are on this. I mean, UMNO backstabbing their partner Bersatu. Obviously, UMNO will say it's not backstab, but Bersatu will say it's a backstab. You have to change from Menteri Besar, and then suddenly they were about to work with Pakatan Harapan. Pakatan Harapan leaders say, yes, we will work with UMNO, and then suddenly last minute, it didn't happen. I mean, really, I think everyone's confused. I, as a member of parliament who sits in opposition but as an independent MP, is damn frustrated. I mean, what's going to happen with opposition? What's going to happen in government? What kind of political alignment will take place? If I'm frustrated, I can't imagine what fellow Malaysians are feeling at the moment. So, I think how that comes into picture will also come into play as to who I believe could potentially become the PM candidate. I honestly want to meet up with these leaders, whether it's Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, who, I mean, I don't understand. On the one hand, wanting to work with Zahid and Najib, on the other hand, saying no. Is it about forming government with Zahid and Najib, or is it not forming government? If you form government in Perak with UMNO, will you form government in federal with UMNO? I mean, the next candidate, whether it's a young candidate from PKR or is someone as senior as Datuk Sri Shafi Abdal, then what is the direction which they want to take? Will they want to form government, or do they want to focus on being in opposition? The reason I say it's tough to answer that, because at the moment, no one in opposition has truly explained what is their vision of Malaysia and how they want to take the opposition bloc forward instead of just focusing on short-term goals. Okay,
sorry. So does that mean
that's
that
my answer.
you don't have a answer to the question who's the best PM candidate next? You're just waiting to see what happens and see how people take action.
I believe whoever gets to pull opposition together and focus on winning the next election and not wanting to form government. I mean, with all due respect, Shahril is a good friend, but with UMNO, especially with a specific element within UMNO, I mean, just to be frank, I was brought into politics by Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, not by Tun Dr. Mahathir. He was the first one who spoke to me, the one who gave me the opportunity, and the one who appointed me as the youth chief of Bersatu. And despite our political differences, there's still that attachment. However, despite how he has helped me, groom me, when he decided to put aside people's mandate and to form government in a very different way, I took a different path. Yes, it meant sacrificing everything which I had before, but there are no regrets on that. So why suddenly, when there's another opposition leader who wants to do exactly the same thing which Tan Sri did, suddenly I will throw my support behind him? That will make me a hypocrite. I mean, if they are saying, don't worry, Saddiq, there will be no change, there will still be institutional reforms, these people will still be held to account. I mean, I'm telling them today that I heard the same thing by the president of my party then. And if anything, I would have more sentimental attachment with the president of my party and the person responsible for bringing me into politics. So really, I think the way in which we move forward should be based on principles, vision of how we take Malaysia forward, not on power and positions. I mean, what happened in Perak was a clear example. I mean, I don't know who's the biggest winner in this. Some will say it's UMNO, some will say it's Pakatan Harapan, some will say it's Tan Sri in the long game because it shows that UMNO is a hypocrite and could work with JP. I mean, really, we don't know. But as an opposition member, I will hold the opposition accountable. I mean, really, if it's about, never mind, we will get our exco positions back, we will get to be in power in Perak. I mean, seriously, we are confusing our supporters. Worse, we are betraying what we stand for. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of Shahril's party, I'm going to speak on behalf of opposition. So really, we need to move forward in coming up with a clear vision and focusing on how we want to take opposition bloc forward and winning the next election.
Okay, thank you. And Shahril, your response to that?
Yeah, just quite quickly. I think in Saddiq's exasperation, you identify the fact that perhaps the fault lines isn't always party versus party, but it's also generations within the party, or subgroups, not in terms of parochial or feudalistic loyalties, but just your outlook of the world. So someone like Saddiq would say we should focus on the people, focus on visions, debate on policy. Someone like me would say exactly that. Someone in my party would say completely the opposite and just think of machinations every day. And someone from the opposition, Saddiq's friends, would also do the same. So here's where Malaysian politics gets complicated, right? In the past, people would say there's a super high correlation between the former, the more idealistic, visionary, people first, blah 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 stuff with Pakatan Harapan, and a strong correlation of the latter with UMNO and Barisan. I think what's happened over the past couple of years is even the most ardent anti-BN guys are starting to realize it's perhaps more complicated than that. And if that opens up opportunities down the line for, again, regeneration of both sides of the divide, understanding that the divide itself is no longer a brick wall, but appears to be more translucent or whatever than perhaps we thought, then maybe what we need to hope for through the next election, or at least one or two more, maximum another 2 cycles, is for a new generation to take over leadership and key positions in all political parties. Then we can start to see whether there is sincerity in the Saddiqs and the Shahrils of the world. Until that happens, then I'm afraid we are stuck with this short-term game, because everyone just thinks of 1 year horizon, how do we take back power? And people who want to talk about more substantive issues don't get the airtime, don't get the followership, don't get the buzz. So that's the real problem we have. And I want to end this particular point with this. And I've said this before on a forum which incidentally Saddiq was on. I said so much of what we're facing is because we are still colored by personalities that have been at each other's throats for decades.
Yeah.
And the 2 names that I don't have to mention, people can think of already. They've been doing this to each other since I was a kid, since Saddiq was even younger than me. And these are still the 2 figures who have colored what's happened over the past couple of years. And everybody else's loyalties is somehow bound by these 2 guys, whether it's personal vendetta or some unfulfilled dream. I don't know. I can't explain it. It doesn't seem, in some ways, honestly, I hope I don't sound rude when I say this, but it doesn't always entirely seem rational to me. I mean, why would you fight for something so hard when it's just, I mean, it's great. I'm sure being PM is great, but surely there's bigger things in life and death. But in any case, we are all somehow just still playing to their beat of the drum in one way or another. We try and go away, some of us become more rebellious than others, but we're still in that paradigm. And I just hope within 1 or 2 cycles we get out of that paradigm. Otherwise, what we've just been chatting about will just remain a dream, because until regeneration happens, it's still going to be the same old thing, I'm afraid.
If I may add to what Shahril mentioned, and again to be more critical of myself and opposition, is that I don't think we should wait for 1 or 2 cycles. It must happen now. And again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Shahril's party and BN in particular, but to share what opposition face, is that when BN lost power for the very first time after more than 60 years in government, and still electing the same batch of leaders, a lot of the division chiefs were the same, the president and alike were largely from the same group. We in opposition made fun of them. Right? Said, this, you took the advisor who's the former PM, advisor BN, you appointed a president who was a former deputy prime minister. It's like you didn't learn. Where are all the new faces? Where's the like of KJ and Shahril? Where are these people? I mean, I think Shahril, to be honest, is in a better position than maybe his mentor, YBKJ, which is now he's stuck, truly stuck. I mean, you won't admit, but I'm pretty sure deep down you would. So we were making fun. I mean,
He might be watching this trouble.
We were holding like BN to higher standards. But then, when March came, we lost power. You know. And I personally thought that when we lost power, we would have learned from our mistakes. You know, we will stop talking about, PM this, PM that, this will be the person, that will be the person, it can't be this, it can't be that. And I thought we would revitalize leadership in our parties, that we will hold our leaders accountable. But no, we're back. Even when we were in power, we don't have power anymore. We're still fighting, thinking that there is that semblance of power. And that's worrying. I mean, when will the leaders admit the mistakes, be held accountable, and then start giving opportunities to others? If not, I mean, really, you can have 10 changes in government, but if we don't admit of that structural failings, we won't go anywhere. So that's why I personally hope, in next election, voters will start asking, not just looking at personalities, but ask hard questions. Okay, whether it's PMA, B, C, D, all these candidates, what are the democratic reforms which you want to bring? Do you think that there is a problem with MACC? Do you think that there's a problem with the parliament? Do you think that there's a problem with how we run Malaysian democracy? We need to start asking these policy questions and assessing them based on who will bring this in. The problem is, when you have all of those, but then they don't even believe in it, they don't even want it. So, I mean, when we don't ask these questions, and you only pigeonhole it on a few issues, then you won't get the systemic change which Malaysia deserves. So move away from personality-based politics to more policy-based politics. I think when we go down that path, Malaysia will move forward. And I don't think we should wait for 2 terms. It should happen now. Maybe for Shahril's party, like tougher, we need time. But for opposition, I will hold opposition coalition to account. We need to move forward, because, to be honest, if we use the same old formula, which we did for PRU 14, GE 14, and doing it now, thinking that it will work again, we're bound to fail. It's time for us to prepare for the long haul. If it means going on the ground and changing hearts and minds of people and taking more time and making difficult changes in respective parties and coalition, this is the time to do so. Because if we don't, then don't expect for Shushan and the group of friends you mentioned about to suddenly care about voting for us in the next election, because they won't, because they will no longer see hope in Malaysia.
Okay, so look, I can see messages coming through that obviously time is up. Somebody comments that, Sean here comments, nobody picked a prime minister. I thought Shahril might have chosen KJ. I mean, I wouldn't have an issue with KJ.
Shahril, is that true? Would you say that to the president of your party?
I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I didn't hear you. At least we'd have an Oxford boy.
By giving a long-winded answer to escape the actual question, so I just followed through.
Well, I guess the question isn't who is the best candidate for PM, but who is going to bring about the best changes for our country, because those are different things. Like, as you said, it's like a battle of personalities, and we're not looking at more of like what reforms they're going to institute. So that's what we should be focusing on instead. Not who it's going to be, who's the face of it, but what's going to come with it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, could we just finish with one very simple question, straight question? I'd be interested in where you guys get your information from, because I think one thing that I did want to touch on actually was the media, right? The way in which the media, we all get our ideas, our information from the media. What media do you follow, Shahril? I mean, international, local, Malaysian, Malay, Chinese, English medium. What do you read to keep yourself informed and abreast of the situation?
So local media, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything everybody else reads, I suppose.
Malaysia Kini?
I do Malaysia Kini. I do Malaysia Kini.
Sensitive. Are you sure, Shahril?
Yes, I'm sure. It's not always my first reference, but I have an account with Malaysia Kini. I pay for it, so that says a lot.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah.
Of course, I see the free
drink it now.
I'm also Malaysian, so I go for the free stuff as well. So I do FMT, then I'll do the Sina online and Utusan to cover that part of the. Yeah, I think as a politician, Saddiq will probably agree with this. We need to see different angles in the press because everyone writes from a different perspective and perhaps have not necessarily different masters, but different audiences in terms of who they're trying to pander to. And there's an element of truth to all of these, angles, right? So part of our job, I imagine, is to understand those. So I read more than perhaps I can't just pick my favorite media, but for international press, I love The Guardian again because Malaysian, so it's free.
It's free,
Not
yeah.
But I steal my brother's. I shouldn't say this, but I borrow my brother's NYT account to also access that because that's subscription only. But The Guardian I love because I'm also, I can say this now, definitely left of center politically. So Guardian's always been home to me even when I was studying there. So I love their features and everything that goes with it. I listen to their podcast a lot. So there's this podcast called The Guardian Politics Weekly, which I listen from time to time. Today in Focus are the other podcasts that really engages with not just UK-based issues, but global issues, but from a Guardian bent, which is one that I always enjoy. So that I would say is my go-to foreign publication.
Thank you. And Syed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the question is related to how I form my worldview today, but just to share how worldviews change, especially if you're surrounding. Before this, I was a closeted racist. And I have to admit, through my past, it's because I didn't read at all. And at one point in time, I thought that my sister should not work because of her gender. I thought those who do not share the same race as me was inferior. But a lot of those changed, not just because of what I read, but because I entered the Royal Military College. It's the most diverse boarding school in Malaysia. And then that's where I get exposed, we get bullied together. It doesn't matter whether you're Malay, Chinese, Indian, when you get bullied, you get bullied. Study together, and that built a strong sense of camaraderie, which then changed my worldview, which also then introduced me to debating, and debating then compelled me to read up a lot more. So it's not just about reading, it's also about your exposure, your upbringing. I think that all plays a very important role. But to answer specifically about reading, I mean, it's to show every day the papers, which it's very old school. We say like, oh, young people no longer read papers. I still do, but don't worry, I still recycle. So it's like if it's Malay, it's Sina Harian and Berita Harian. It's Berita Harian. It's Berita Harian. It's like Malay. Right? Every day I subscribe. And if it's English, it will be Star and also New Straits Times. I have 2 online accounts, which is Utusan, which to be fair is getting much, much better and fair. Utusan, I love their columns as well, and also Malaysia Kini, which I've been a loyal follower. Online, FMT, TMI, obviously all there. But these are the papers which I subscribe. If it's foreign press, every morning at 3, the same BBC, Al Jazeera, and Economist. So again, BBC, Al Jazeera, both are free. So it's quite easy. Economist, again, I shouldn't admit this, but up until today, I still use the debating account. So I still get to access it for free online. I download it, and when I go jogging, I listen to the Economist audio, which again can be downloaded. So yeah, it's always the same for my debating days up to today.
Great answers. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to pass over to Sue as the youngest person on the panel. I think probably it's right, Sue, for you to finish off and then maybe say a few words and then pass back to Emma.
Okay. I think my biggest takeaway from today would probably be that despite the fact that both of you come from different political factions, there is a lot of common ground, and that's very, encouraging to see that despite everything, there are a lot of things that we do agree on. And I think like for embracing multiracialism, celebrating diversity, and just being on the whole more compassionate when we deal with Malaysian issues is encouraging. I really hope that everyone who's watching right now, the young people who are like me, either in uni or, freshly graduated, that you watch
Just me? Oh yeah.
So
just
no, I think it's yes, you're back, Sue. Carry on. You froze.
Okay, so to everyone who's watching, who's a young person, whether or not you're a young person, but if you are a young person like me studying university, or if you're just freshly graduated, or if you're someone who is very disillusioned by Malaysian politics in your middle ages, whoever you are, know that you can make a change. Wherever you are in the world, or whether you're in Malaysia, no matter who you are, you can make a change. You will make a change. You just have to get out and do it. You can do it.
Yeah.
There is hope. Don't give up. Just because it seems difficult doesn't mean that it's impossible. And just remember along the way that whatever you're feeling, someone else is probably feeling as well. And it is something that can happen, not overnight, but if we keep taking small steps to get there, we will get there someday. So don't lose hope. And don't lose courage.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, Sue, I agree with you about some common ground there. And we had a lot of soulful confessions coming out there. It was fascinating. I wish that we had longer, and I wish that it had been in person. It was fantastic seeing the two of you being passionate and respectful to each other, and seeing some common ground and some differences as well. And we would love to have you back when we're all allowed to gather in person. I'm sure it would be an amazing evening. So from us, I know you've given us far more time than you wanted to. So thank you so much. That was amazing. YB, thank you very much. Shahril, thank you. I agree with your comment about The Guardian. Those podcasts are superb. Big shout out. Yes, follow those. Thank you so much to Sue and to Mark and to Sharifa for helping. So one final thank you very much to all of the people that watched. Amazing questions. Sorry we couldn't ask them all. And if we can persuade them to come back when this COVID thing's gone, then hopefully we will be able to put more questions to you. So YB and Shahril, thank you very much. Amazing evening. Thank you. Okay, night everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, are we off? Have we stopped recording?